English Podcast Hub. Hey everyone, welcome back to Easy English Conversation. I'm Mia and I'm here with Mark. So, Mark, I had the most interesting conversation with a friend yesterday, and it made me realize something that I think will really help our listeners.
Oh, I'm curious. What happened?
My friend Anna has been learning English for about 7 years. Her grammar is excellent, her vocabulary is impressive, and she can write beautiful essays. But yesterday, she told me, Mia, when I talk to native speakers, they always look at me a little strangely. I can tell something is off, but I don't know what it is.
That's frustrating. Did you figure out what the issue was?
I did. We had coffee together, and as we talked, I noticed that she was speaking very correctly, but very formally. She would say things like, I do not know, instead of I don't know, or that is very interesting, instead of that's really interesting. Every sentence was grammatically perfect, but it sounded like she was reading from a textbook rather than having a natural conversation.
Oh, I see exactly what you mean. She was using the right words, but missing all those little informal touches that make English sound natural and conversational. It's like she was speaking written English out loud instead of spoken English.
Exactly. And this is what we're talking about today, how to sound more natural with simple phrases. Because the truth is, native speakers use a lot of casual expressions, contractions, and little filler phrases that you won't find in grammar books, but that make a huge difference in how natural you sound.
This is such an important topic because I think a lot of learners focus so much on being correct that they forget to be natural. And ironically, being too correct can actually make you sound less fluent.
That's a brilliant way to put it. There's a difference between being correct and being natural. Both are important, but if you want to have comfortable, flowing conversations, you need to learn the way people actually speak, not just the way textbooks say they should speak.
So let's break this down for our listeners. What are some of the biggest differences between textbook English and natural conversational English?
The first and most obvious one is contractions. In natural speech, native speakers use contractions almost all the time. Instead of saying, I am going to the store, we say, I'm going to the store. Instead of, she does not like coffee, we say, she doesn't like coffee.
Right, and using the full forms like I am or does not in casual conversation actually sounds stiff and formal, doesn't it? It's not wrong, but it signals that you're being very careful or very formal, which creates a bit of distance in the conversation.
Exactly. And here's something interesting. There are different levels of contractions that native speakers use. We don't just say, I am going to, we say, I'm gonna. We don't say want to, we say wanna. We don't say got to, we say gotta.
Oh, this is crucial. So I'm going to go to the store sounds much more natural than I am going to go to the store, even though both are understood. But I imagine some learners might worry that using gonna or wanna is incorrect or too casual.
That's a common concern, and I want to address it directly. These informal contractions are not incorrect. They're how native speakers actually talk in everyday situations. Now, you wouldn't use them in a formal presentation or academic writing, but in casual conversation, they're completely normal and expected.
So it's about matching your language to the situation. In a job interview or a formal setting, you might be a bit more careful, but with friends or in casual situations, using these natural contractions makes you sound fluent and comfortable.
Exactly. And speaking of sounding comfortable, let's talk about conversation fillers. These are little words and phrases that native speakers use constantly, often without even realizing it.
Like, and I think learners often try to avoid those because they think it sounds like they don't know what to say.
Yes, but here's the thing. Native speakers use those fillers all the time. They're a natural part of speech because we need time to think while we're talking. But there are more sophisticated fillers that are even more useful. Things like, you know, I mean, like, actually, and basically.
Can you give some examples of how those would sound in natural conversation?
Sure. Instead of saying, the movie was good, a native speaker might say, you know, the movie was actually pretty good. Or the movie was like really good. Instead of, I am tired, they might say, I mean, I'm basically exhausted.
I see. These little words don't change the meaning much, but they make the sentence sound more conversational and less rehearsed. It's like they add a natural rhythm to the speech.
Exactly. And you know is particularly interesting because it's often used to create connection with the listener. When you say you know, you're inviting the listener to relate to what you're saying. It's like saying, you understand what I mean, right?
That's a great point. So these fillers aren't just buying you time to think, they're also creating a sense of rapport and shared understanding with the person you're talking to.
Yes. And let's talk about another category of natural phrases, response phrases. These are the little things you say to show you're listening and engaged in the conversation.
Like, and yeah?
Those are good examples, but there are so many more. Native speakers use phrases like, oh, really? No way. That's crazy. I know, right? Totally, for sure, and absolutely to respond to what someone is saying.
And I've noticed that these responses often come with a lot of energy and intonation. It's not just what you say, but how you say it that shows you're engaged.
Absolutely. And here's something learners might not realize. In English conversations, the listener is quite active. We don't just sit silently until it's our turn to talk. We make little sounds and say little phrases throughout to show we're following along.
So if someone is telling you a story and you just sit there silently nodding, even though you're understanding everything, it might seem like you're not interested or not paying attention.
Exactly. In English speaking cultures, we expect the listener to give frequent feedback, little mhms, ohs, wows, and reallys throughout the conversation. This is called back channeling, and it's a really important part of natural conversation.
That's such a useful thing to know. So learners should practice not just speaking, but also these active listening responses. What are some other simple phrases that make you sound more natural?
Let's talk about softeners and hedging language. Native speakers rarely make direct, absolute statements in casual conversation. Instead, we soften our opinions and statements with phrases like kind of, sort of, pretty much, I guess, and I think.
Can you give an example of how that changes a sentence?
Sure. Instead of saying, this restaurant is expensive, a native speaker would more likely say, this restaurant is kind of expensive, or I guess this restaurant is pretty expensive. Instead of, I am tired, they might say, I'm sort of tired, or I'm pretty tired.
Why do we do that? Why not just make direct statements?
It's partly about politeness and partly about not wanting to sound too absolute or aggressive. English speaking cultures, especially American and British cultures, often value not being too forceful or opinionated in casual settings. Softening your statements makes you sound more friendly and approachable.
So it's another way of creating connection and not putting people off. Instead of sounding like you're stating absolute facts, you're sharing your perspective in a more gentle way.
Exactly. And here's another category, agreement and disagreement phrases. When you agree with someone, native speakers don't usually just say, I agree. They use phrases like, same here, me too, I feel the same way. That's exactly what I think, or you're totally right.
And those all have different energies and levels of enthusiasm, don't they? Me too is simple agreement, while you're totally right is stronger agreement.
Yes, and for disagreement, native speakers also tend to soften it. Instead of saying, I disagree or you're wrong, we might say, I'm not sure about that. I see what you mean, but actually, I think, or I hear you, but.
So you're acknowledging the other person's perspective before presenting your own. That's much more diplomatic than direct disagreement.
Exactly. And this brings us to transition phrases. These are super useful for keeping conversation flowing naturally. Things like, by the way, speaking of which, that reminds me, anyway, on a different note, and oh, before I forget.
These help you change topics smoothly instead of awkwardly jumping from one subject to another, right?
Yes. For example, if you're talking about the weather and you want to mention something else, you might say, by the way, did you see that new movie? Or, speaking of cold weather, that reminds me, I need to buy a new jacket.
So it creates a bridge between topics and makes the conversation feel more natural and connected rather than disjointed.
Exactly. Now let's talk about showing interest and asking follow-up questions. Native speakers use a lot of little phrases to show curiosity and keep conversation going. Things like, how come? Oh yeah? Tell me more. What happened then? And how did that go?
These are so important because they keep the conversation alive and show that you're genuinely interested in what the other person is saying, not just waiting for your turn to talk.
Right. And here's a phrase that learners often don't know, but native speakers use constantly, how come, instead of why. Both ask for a reason, but how come sounds more casual and conversational.
Can you give an example?
Sure, if someone says, I didn't go to the party, instead of asking why, which can sound a bit abrupt, you'd more naturally say, oh, how come? It's friendlier and more conversational.
I love that. What about phrases for ending conversations? I think that's something learners struggle with, how to politely wrap up a conversation without being rude.
Great point. Native speakers use phrases like, I should probably get going. I don't want to keep you. It was great talking to you. Let's catch up soon. We should do this again, and I'll let you go.
And I'll let you go is interesting because you're framing it as if you're doing the other person a favor by ending the conversation, even though you're the one who wants to leave.
Exactly. It's a polite fiction that makes ending the conversation easier for both people. Nobody has to feel rejected or like they're being dismissed.
These social niceties are so important in English conversation. Now, I want to address something. Some learners might be listening to this and thinking, this is too much. How am I supposed to remember all these phrases?
That's a really valid concern. Here's my advice. You don't need to learn all of these at once. Pick 3 or 4 phrases that resonate with you that you can imagine yourself using and practice incorporating just those into your conversations.
So start small and build gradually rather than trying to master everything at once.
Exactly. For example, this week you might focus on just using contractions more naturally. Next week, maybe you add in you know and I mean as fillers. The week after that, you practice using kind of and sort of to soften your statements.
That's much more manageable. And I imagine that as you get comfortable with a few phrases, adding more becomes easier because you're developing a feel for conversational English.
Yes. And here's another tip. Watch movies, TV shows, or YouTube videos and pay special attention to these little phrases. You'll start noticing them everywhere once you know what to listen for.
So it's about active observation, not just understanding the content, but analyzing how people are speaking.
Exactly. And if you have English-speaking friends or conversation partners, don't be afraid to use these phrases, even if they feel awkward at first. The more you use them, the more natural they'll become.
Practice makes perfect, or in this case, practice makes natural. Now, before we wrap up, are there any phrases that learners should be careful about? Things that might sound too casual or potentially inappropriate?
Good question. Some very casual slang should probably be avoided unless you're very close friends with someone. And be aware that some phrases are more common in certain English-speaking countries than others. For example, cheers as a goodbye is very British but less common in American English.
So there's some cultural variation to be aware of. But the phrases we've discussed today, contractions, fillers like you know and I mean, softeners like kind of, response phrases like oh really, these are pretty universal in casual English conversation.
Yes, these are widely used across different English-speaking countries and contexts. They're safe to practice and incorporate into your everyday English.
Perfect. So to summarize for our listeners, if you want to sound more natural in English, start using contractions, add conversational fillers, practice active listening responses, soften your statements, and use transition phrases to connect your ideas smoothly.
Beautifully summarized. And remember, the goal isn't to sound exactly like a native speaker. The goal is to sound comfortable, natural, and easy to talk to. These simple phrases help you achieve that.
And the beautiful thing is that these are simple. You're not learning complicated grammar or obscure vocabulary. You're learning the everyday, simple phrases that make the biggest difference in how natural you sound.
Exactly. Sometimes the simplest things have the biggest impact. You don't need fancy words, you need natural conversational flow.
Well, I think we've given our listeners a lot to practice this week. Thanks so much for tuning in to Easy English Conversation, everyone. Until next time, practice those natural phrases.
Yes. Pick a few phrases, use them this week, and notice how much more natural your English feels. See you next time.